Gavel. Anyway, thanks for coming, everybody. Just going to close the doors. That's good. Welcome to the House Ag and Natural Resources Budget Committee. Are there any bill introductions? We're going to do curb and the vets today. So, Luke, do you have something to say?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Luke Drury, and I am a fiscal analyst with the Kansas Legislative Research Department. And today I will be going through two different budgets for you. But before we dig into that, I did put in your spots House Budget Committee and Senate Subcommittee report out procedures. I did want to mention that the committee reports that are generated from the action here will be completed by us in research, and then you all will receive a committee report no later than by noon the day that the budget is reported to be out. For these particular ones today, for curb and veterinary examiners, they are scheduled to report out in House Appropriations on Tuesday. That is a change from Monday. Members will not need to reply to the committee report. And then if you are, if there is an interest in doing a minority report, you reach out to me or other staff. We will help you with that. Again, this here is for you all, just as a reminder about our report out procedures. Okay. All righty. Sure. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, my name is Luke Drury, fiscal analyst with Legislative Research, and I have here the Citizens Utility Ratepayer Board budget analysis. I will be walking through this here with you all. You all should have this in front of you. And then after I give my budget analysis and any questions you all may have, David Nickel, the Consumer Counsel with the agency, will be available to also give some testimony and answer some questions. So on the first page here, it's just an overview of the actual expenditures along with the agency request governor recommendations for 23 and 24. As you can see, the governor concurs with the agency's budgets for 23 and 24. However, I will start my presentation here on page, we start on page 4. And this is for the Utility Regulatory Fee Fund. The ending balance of the Utility Regulatory Fee Fund decreased by $130,000 from 20 to 21, although the ending balance in FY 2022 increased by $91,971. Mr. Chair, I will slow down. Those decreases are mainly attributable to increased expenditures requested by the agency. The ending balance from 2020 to 2021 and 2022 were relatively stable. Moving on to page 5, we'll get into the FY 2023 analysis. There were no changes made to the $1.2 million appropriated to the Citizens Utility Ratepayer Board in 2023. The agency's revised estimate is, and up here at the top, you can see what their approved number was by the 2020 legislature. No changes by the legislature since then. And then items 2, 3, and 4 will correspond with the numbers below. So the agency estimates, the updated agency estimates include increases for contractual service expenditures. For this particular agency, they are allowed to there's language in the appropriations bill that allows them to roll over unspent funds from consultant services in a given fiscal year. So in this particular case, they did roll over some consulting fees from 2022, totaling $147,440 into 2023. All other adjustments made by the agency result in a net decrease of $986. Specifically, these are related to agency estimates for capital outlay. And if you all remember from capital outlay, that includes items such as computers, printers, things of that nature. The governor concurs with the agency's 2023 revised estimate. Mr. Chair, would you like me to stand for questions or move to 2024?
Committee, do you have any questions on 23? Representative, go ahead. Yeah. You have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just noticing as you read that, and I don't know if I noticed it in the draft I was working with before, but the carryover is 147,440. But what is that 148,000 up at the top of the page on page 5? The 148 carryover funds. So why is it a different amount?
Mr. Chair, that's a very good question. That 148 includes the 147,440 and other changes to contractual services. There should have been or could have been an additional line item in there, but that also includes changes to estimates for engineers, economists, and technical experts.
I'm sorry, for what? Engineers what?
Engineers, economists, and technical experts.
But it's only like a little bit of money. Okay, $986. Okay, all right. I just kind of noticed that it wasn't the same amount, and I thought I'd ask. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions on 23, guys? Yeah. Luke, go ahead and do 24.
Moving on to the 2024 analysis, you will see that on page 7. So at the top of the page here, it shows what the agency's revised estimate was for FY 2023, and then adjustments were made from that. And again, it will correspond with the number further on down the page. So as you can see, item number 1 for contractual services, that is a reduction of $139,000, $239. Again, this is related to the carry forward balances moving into 2023. That is to say that these balances moved from 22 into 23 with expectation that they will be expended and then therefore will not be part of the base for 2024. That's essentially where that comes from. All other adjustments made by the agency total about $5,000. And this is directly attributable to employer contributions to fringe benefit rates and more specifically group health insurance. This is something that I've seen in other agencies as well. Just the estimates for fringe benefit rates are changing. And so there are some increased estimates for those expenditures. And the governor concurs with the agency's 2024 request.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's probably not a budget question, but CURB, it only deals with those municipalities or providers that are regulated by KCC. So that would not include activity for, like, say, muni-owned utilities. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, I would say I actually can't answer that question right now, but I can certainly look into that and get back with you. Okay. If there are no other questions, I will just mention briefly, Mr. Chair, on page number 6, the change from actual expenditures 2023. Agency estimates, the FY 2023 estimates are 57% or about $500,000 more than 2022 actual expenditures. So on the front page, you see that like 800,000 and then it goes to whatever that number is. Off the top of my head, I don't remember. But those changes are directly attributable to the salary increases approved by the 2022 legislature. Again, some changes to fringe benefit rates. And then additionally, it is noted by the agency that they typically estimate expenditures on the higher side, just in case of the occurrence of some increased case filings. So, and then with that, Mr. Chair, if there are any other questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Luke, I was going to inquire about the pay. So the pay increase was for 22. 2022?
Mr. Chair, the pay increases were approved by the 2022 legislature starting in fiscal year 2023.
Okay. So the amount that of the pay increases is the 501,690.
Mr. Chair, that 501,000 is not all attributable to salaries and wages. Like, for example, 147,000, part of that was the carryover from consultant services. Some of that is salaries and wages specifically. Some of that is fringe benefit rates. And then the balance of that is just increased estimates for various items in the agency's budget, again, in the occurrence of increased case filings.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I don't know why those things have to be bundled into one line, $1 number. Those seem like a little bit separate kinds of items. Couldn't we ask, and I don't know if it's the agency or you all that prepares this spreadsheet, but I would like to, I could see the 147,000 is in there, but why is it all in one number? And I would suggest that salary and fringe benefits could be in one number and a carryover should be in another. And if there's another item in there, it should be separate so that we can see what's happening. And so we don't have to wonder all the time. I have a question also, but it may not be for you. Are all the FTEs filled now?
Mr. Chair, I can't speak to whether all FTEs are filled.
Ask the agency. Okay, I think, and then there's 116% item on the page 9 on the performance measures. They have 116% performance item on number 2. And I'm just wondering, I mean, how do we get 116%?
Mr. Chair, those are performance measures that are reported by the agency. I will go back and double check to make sure that's not a typo. But those are self-reported measures that the agency does
Again, the
provide.
agency might be able to answer that question. And thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
And then, Mr. Chair, I will get that breakdown of that lump sum. That lump sum does have everything, but I have those discrete numbers, and I'll break those down and I'll get those to the committee.
Committee, any,
Future budgets that we're going to do might even be bigger issue than this one.
okay. Committee, any other questions? Luke, great job. Thank you. Next up is David Nickel.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. It is always a pleasure to speak to this particular committee. It's a highlight, frankly, of every year for me. So thank you for what you do, and thank you for considering CURB's budget. I'm going to start. There are a number of questions that I'll try to answer that our analyst doesn't know our agency quite as well as we do, hopefully. And so I'll try to answer those questions, good questions that have been asked. And I'm going to start, if I could, with our performance-based metrics, based budgeting metrics.
I don't know what page we have and you're on.
9? Is that 9?
Were these handed out to everybody? Okay, and I'd like to start on page 4. I'm going to skip the narration, although I will tell the committee that the prose there in that narration probably rivals Tolstoy and Mark Twain. But I'll skip right through that and just get to the metrics. So we basically represent small commercial and residential ratepayers before the KCC and the Kansas Legislature. We are involved in regulated enterprises with the enterprises that the KCC regulates. So we don't necessarily regulate municipalities because they're not regulated by the KCC, or RECs because they're exempt from the KCC by their election to be so. However, that said, we sometimes do get questions from people from municipalities or from RECs, and we try our best to reach out, try to help those consumers with whatever questions they have. Not surprisingly, we had Alderman Swartz questions from Kansans with regard to Winter Storm Uri, and we didn't turn them away. We tried to help whoever it was that called and tried to come up with some type of an answer, or refer them to the right place. So our main objective is to really represent our constituents before the KCC in rate cases, because that's where our rates are typically set. And we did represent, in our advocacy for them, these constituents did ask for a 116% decrease. What that means is, in the aggregate of the cases that we were involved in, we actually asked for a refund. We said, you're earning too much money. We didn't start with zero. We said, no, you ought to lower your rates. So that's why the 116. In other words, we were about 16% lower than the rates that the utilities proposed to charge, or were charging. So we actually thought that there should be a refund. So that's why the 116. Ultimately, we spent about $154,000 of ratepayers' fee funds. And as a result of that, we ended up with 24.3 million dollars in terms of rate savings for our consumers. I'll go through those numbers in a little bit. We also involve ourselves, notwithstanding whether rate cases or not, any KCC dockets that are filed. And we exclude certificates of convenience or ceasing of certificates of convenience, because those matters really are not too pertinent to our ratepayers. But we involved in 29, we intervened in 29 cases. We're involved in 94 cases during the fiscal year. And I'll show the savings that we got out of an illustration of the savings that we got by virtue of our involvement in specific cases. But if you were to take what it costs the consumer by using state agency personnel to represent them versus hiring, retaining out experts that our analysts do, or hiring counsel out, we save about $1.1 million. So there's some real good opportunity cost by using state agency versus using a head and hiring those personnel out. We also involve ourselves before the legislature, and we looked at 15 bills and made recommendations with regard to 4 of those. We represent consumers with regard to complaint cases. A consumer will call, they'll have a complaint or concern that they want. Most times it's high bills. Sometimes it's failure to read a meter, or they think it's misread. And we'll help them to the extent that they want us to help them file a complaint. We'll help them file a complaint in the right form so they're not dismissed summarily by the commission. So we have our involvement with that. And then we try to do some policy research. With regard to our budget, we've asked for two new members, and it was approved last year. Unfortunately, with the economy, we haven't found anybody to fill them yet. We're still continuing to try, and we'll reach out again as soon as this budget is over and see if we can find some new people to help us out. Why that's important is because we really want to do more in terms of our outreach. Consumers don't really understand rate cases. They don't, they see the bottom line, but they don't understand how CURB's involvement is on that. But there are lots of opportunities for us to reach out to consumers to help them. For example, energy efficiency. If energy efficiency is adopted by the state, we think we could reach out to consumers to make sure that they're using energy efficient measures and help to lower their bills. Time of use rates are going to be proposed in the next rate case by Evergy. Time of use rates are highly complex, and if you don't understand what the elements or the paradigms that are associated with that, you could end up with substantially higher bills. So reaching out to our consumers and helping educate them as to those new optional rates, if they're approved by the commission, are other ways that we can help. With the manpower that we have, it's difficult to do all the KCC cases and still have a robust outreach program and work with the legislature, which we consider to be, when we get an opportunity to work with the legislature, it's a high point for us. We go back and high five each other. Hey, we got an opportunity to talk to a legislator. So those are where we plan to go. If you turn to page 5, you'll see where we spend our time. You'll see 77% of our time is spent on KCC cases. That's because of the complexity of the cases and the number of cases that we end up hearing. Policy work, we spend another 10%. Outreach is about 9%. Legislative work is about 3%. And then working on formal complaints It's about 1%, primarily because we can't control those cases. We just basically respond when those complaints or those concerns come in. We do respond to 100% of anybody that calls into our office. In terms of time spent in cases, page 6, you'll see that most of our time was spent on Winter Storm Uri cases. Not surprising. Those were big matters for Kansas consumers. And we spent some time on the energy demand side energy efficiency case, along with the rate cases that we handled. So you can see those. Turning to page 7, I represented to you that there were rate case savings. There were 3 cases that we were involved in, 2 of which we intervened in fiscal year 2022. In all of those cases, we ended up saving monies for the ratepayers in the Black Hills case of $10.8 million, in the Empire District Electric case, $13.5 million. And how we derive that is the amount of savings per year that derives from our position. Now, we combine with other stakeholders to try to get those rates as low as possible, but we certainly were helpful. And we ended up with $24.3 million worth of savings versus $154,000 worth of rate cost to the consumers. So a net of $24.145 million. Those are values to our consumers by virtue of our work in those dockets. I'm going to turn to the next page is Winter Storm Uri. And this is an example of cases where we do really help. Under the KCC's order, as they initially set out, they asked for these advance of funds by the utility to be at the weighted average cost of capital. One of our analysts said that's too much. We need to actually see if we can lower that amount. So we asked the utilities, can you lower that amount? Can you bring that cost down? And they did. They brought their cost down way low, like 2%, 1%. And in the case of Evergy, 0 at a certain point in time. So, I mean, hats off to our utilities. They saw that consumers were suffering by virtue of the high cost of gas, high cost of electricity during that period, caused by elements that were not within their control. But they pursuant to our ask, they were willing to turn around and save, all told, about $90.3 million. Now, no consumer really wants to pay those high costs. I mean, that was a terrible thing to occur. Better than losing power, better than losing lives, clearly. But, I mean, those costs were exorbitantly high, not caused by our utilities. But our utilities did help us reduce those costs by $90 million. So that's a good thing. And it's something that we can show that we can work with our utilities to try to reduce cost. I highlighted on page 9 some of the areas where we work on policy research. Energy efficiency is one that's very important. We try to keep current on best practices and current events so we can chime in when necessary. And then the next 3 pages after that, we talk about our analysis of legislation in fiscal year 2022. The next 4 pages have to do with our 3-year performance-based budget and how we compare. And I won't go through those numbers. They're there for you. I do want to talk a little bit about pages 17 and 18 about where we are and where we see our work is increasing. Not to say that it'll stay this way, but it's important to note that from fiscal year 2020 to 2022, our number of hours that we're expending in KCC dockets has increased substantially. We've gone from, in 2020, fiscal year 2020, 2,967 hours in KCC cases up to about 6,000 hours in KCC cases. That primarily has to do with the complexity of the cases, the fact that we had COVID cases, Winter Storm Uri cases, and other cases that we were involved in and required substantial time. But you can see on the next page how that affects our other performance measures. So with the addition of what we hope to bring 2 new members on, we hope that will allow us to be more robust in terms of our outreach programs, more robust in terms of our legislative outreach and working with legislators here and helping you do the important aspects of your job to the extent that we can. I did want to stop for a moment to tell you that KCC also values CURB's existence and our representation of our consumers. There are a number of cases I could have brought, but I wanted to bring a couple to your attention. One has to do with the COVID cases. And the commission, upon a staff report and recommendation, wanted to, in those dockets, CURB objected to that, and on the order, the commission found, quote, on December 12, 2022, the Citizens Utility Ratepayer Board responded to staff's report and recommendation in favor of extending the protections until after the cold weather rule lapsed in March 2023. And continuing the reporting requirements on customer data at least quarterly for another year. The commission then found, thus the commission believes CURB's comments strike a proper balance by waiting until March 2023 to end the additional protective measures. However, the commission adopts staff's recommendation to discontinue all orders with regard to COVID-19 pandemic and the monthly customer reporting requirements. So you can see that the commission does recognize CURB in a lot of different dockets, this one being illustrative. On the STP docket, the Sustainability Transformation Plan that the commission heard had a huge investigative docket. The commission found, excuse me, the commission agrees with CURB's description of the purpose of this docket, quote, CURB views this proceeding simply as an informational proceeding. Therefore, it is CURB's understanding that the STP will neither be accepted nor rejected by the KCC in this proceeding. However, it may be appropriate to establish some general guidelines to inform Evergy at this time regarding the factors that will be considered by the parties once the rate moratorium ends and the company seeks recovery of the capital investments outlined in the STP. That's the end of the quote from CURB. Then the commission continues. Thus, the commission clarifies it is not making any decisions on the merits of the programs within the STP or the prudence of associated investments. Those decisions are reserved for Evergy's future rate cases, which are coming this year. As CURB articulated, this docket is investigatory in nature rather than rate making. The investigation was necessary to give the commission and stakeholders insight into the motivations and impacts of Evergy's STP. However, this proceeding has not created sufficient evidentiary record to make granular determinations on the merits of Evergy's STP. So again, just to illustrate, the commission does pay attention to what CURB does say and does recognize value. As to our budget, we're asking for 1.3 and our amended revised 2023 budget request. That's primarily due to the increase in the number of personnel that we've asked for and been approved, our carryover, and the 5% increase in terms of salaries. And then that carryover is backed out for 2024. So I'm here to answer any questions. Thank you for indulgence of my description of what we do.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm just wondering, first time I've really kind of heard your budget like this. So I'm kind of wondering your work in energy efficiency and particularly low income rates and energy burden. Just trying to understand a little bit of that, of what you do. I'll just frame that up a little bit so that you have a perspective that I'm kind of coming from in that I represent a district that has a lot of older housing stock. And as we look at energy use, a lot of ways that we could help folks, but not only, help them with utility bills, but also help with just energy efficiency is to make sure that we have housing stock that has weatherization and so do you all work in that area as well?
We partner with others to work in that area. The Housing Resource Corporation, I think, does a lot of that work, and our utilities do some in terms of that aspect of it. However, we have a bill that's pending before the legislature this year that will address low income ratepayers and to provide some type of relief for them. Now, that doesn't mean rate relief necessarily. What that may mean is programs to bring weatherization to those programs. One of the big aspects of energy efficiency docket that was heard by the commission has to do with weatherization, and particularly weatherizing low-income housing. I mean, that's the low-hanging fruit, frankly. Low-income people don't have the funds to be able to weatherize. And so they end up with huge bills. They end up, their housing stock is poor. They end up with a lot of really energy inefficiency, for lack of a better term, in terms of their house. So we need to find some way to be able to get that housing stock in better place and help them weatherize and the like. Those are areas that are very important to CURB. We've analyzed it. We spent a lot of time on researching those aspects of it. And we hope that this year the legislature will pass low-income tariff legislation that will allow our utilities to come in and help not only those low-income residents, but other low-income residents afford their bills, maybe through other means. So there are lots of ways to do that. It's an envelope. It's not a prescriptive matter.
Any questions? I've got a couple of questions for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So every time that we are in approached or any place we're talking and it gets down to businesses coming somewhere, big business always throws Oklahoma in our face for cheap electricity. And is there any way we'll ever, I mean, does surely Kansas sees that? I mean, surely somebody in Kansas sees that. Why is our electricity always higher than Oklahoma?
That's a great question. It's a hard question too. I think you have to go back historically to where we were when we retrofitted Lacine and JEC. Those were huge investments that were made, and those caused increases in our rates. Now, those were prudently decided matters at the time, and the commission determined that those retrofits were necessary, and they allowed those costs to go through, but they did increase rates. We see an awful lot of transmission and delivery charges that come on our bills, not necessarily by base rates, but by virtue of the FERC's rules with regard to transmission. Those add costs to our rates. Those are elements that cause our rates to be where they're at. With regard to Oklahoma, Oklahoma has enjoyed low cost natural gas in terms of the generation, and up to a certain point, that's been great for them, and certainly has added fuel to the fire that our rates are higher than in the region. That's changed a little bit because natural gas prices are considerably higher than they were 3 years ago, and so we're not sure exactly what that's going to mean. Bottom line is this, and I think the point that I hear you making is we need to do something about the high electricity rates that we have here in Kansas. We're going to work with our utilities to try to do that. I think I think it's kind of a take a village approach. Try to work with everybody to try to figure out what can we do to lower those costs down. Probably doesn't help to just throw rocks at everybody. So if we can help in that regard, it's absolutely imperative that we bring in industry. Panasonic is a great thing for not only for the state of Kansas, but also for our ratepayers, because it'll help reduce the load that everybody bears. So to the extent that we can help bring in industrial load, that will help reduce costs because you're sharing that cost with more people. And so to the extent that we can get there, that's something we can try to do, and things that we can do with our outreach program. So, previews for coming attractions, but really great question.
So the next question I have for you, as you see these wind farms popping up all over, one of my friends had a phone call, and this wind farms out around Abilene. So it's some outfit out of Texas for the wind farms. Says, Mr. So and so, would you like to lease your ground? And he said no. And it kind of got on a little further, and he said, well, if you don't want a wind turbine, you'll probably be getting a transmission line. And the guy says, I don't want a transmission line. He says, bottom line, we'll just condemn it. So with that said, do you think there needs to be legislation passed that the wind people should get their transmission easements set up far before they make the farms?
I think that's it's a policy decision of the legislature. So I think that's a matter that really depends on you, but you raise a very good point. Nobody likes somebody that overreaches, right? And to the extent that you've got a wind farm developer that says, well, these are your choices, we're going to get it this way. We're going to get your land this way. We're going to get it this way. That to me is a classic overreach.
Like you said, he said our farm's been in our family over 100 years. They settled here. It's quiet. See, it'd be bad enough we have to see a turbine. We sure didn't want to have a transmission line going through it. So I have one more question, and I'll let you go. But out of our surrounding states, for cost of doing business, where does Kansas out of like Missouri, Oklahoma, Nebraska, and Colorado, where would we fit in for rates?
I think we're higher than those states.
Higher than all of them.
I think higher than all of them. I don't hold me to that, Mr. Chairman, because I haven't looked real recently. But I know that regionally we are higher than anybody in the vicinity. Now that may have changed a little bit with regard to natural gas, because the natural gas prices have gone up. But at least historically, we've been higher than our neighbors. Maybe with the exception of one or two utilities in Missouri, but I think Oklahoma generally we're higher. Arkansas, I think we're higher. Nebraska is publicly held. I mean, it's a public utility, so that's different. Colorado, I really can't speak to.
Okay. So, committee, any other questions? Representative?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. You mentioned something kind of as you were speaking about rates. I think it's for consumers to understand. I believe you were saying you were trying to help them understand how to keep their rates down, what they can do themselves.
Right.
And did you say time of use rates?
Time of use rates are rates that are determined on when you use your electricity.
Can you talk to this group about that?
Yes.
I've heard things and I don't know if they're accurate. So
what time of use rates is it's a rate design issue. So the KCC, for example, determines how much a utility should be able to collect through their rates. You know, they have a revenue deficiency of, let's say, $20 million, and the commission will determine, well, you're entitled to collect X dollars as a result of what we determine to be just and reasonable rates under the regulatory covenant. Then you've got to determine how you're going to collect those costs through various rate classes, from the industrial class to the small commercial class to the residential class to street lighting, et cetera, et cetera. Typically, that's done through a customer charge and a delivery charge, volumetric charge, and that's how it's typically been done. And it's the customer charge is what you get to pay, regardless of whether you use a kilowatt hour of electricity or you use 10,000 kilowatts hours of electricity, and so that's what your charge is going to be, and then so your bill is determined accordingly. I don't know if that's clear, but I tried. Time of use rates is a little different because it depends on when you use that electricity as to what your volumetric charge is going to be. So if you use it in an off-peak hour, let's say from 9 o'clock in the night till 8 o'clock in the morning, when you start to see more people use it, your rates are going to be lower. And if you use it right at peak time, your rates are going to be higher. And the concept is that you're really trying to assess peak cost depending on when that consumer uses it. The problem with time of use rates is that's very confusing for consumers. And so the first thing that they do is they go out and they start using electricity. They've powered on their computer. They're doing their wash machine. They're cooking dinner all at 6 o'clock in the evening, which is peak time. And then they get the bill that's $600. And they go, what? What in the world? And so it's a learning experience. And to the extent that you can get consumers to understand that, use your electricity when you can, on off-peak hours, you end up with a lower bill, then that's a good thing. And those are things that we think are important to be able to reach out to consumers and help educate them to do through our outreach program.
Well, you did explain that very well, but I also have been told that, and you kind of said that you come in, you turn on your computer and your dishwasher and your oven and your range top at the same time. Someone told me that if you only use one appliance at a time, that it will cut your cost. Is that accurate?
Currently, no.
I mean, I can see when you pile them on during the peak time, that would be expensive. But if you were only using one appliance at that time, it would cost you less.
Right. If you're peak pricing, that's absolutely correct, Representative Carlin. That's absolutely right. However, right now we don't have peak pricing. We have a customer charge, and then we have a volume charge. So it doesn't matter when you use electricity. Well, we have a voluntary time of use rate, but it's not really highly used at this point. It capped out at 1,000. So by and large, most residential consumers are going to just end up with however much energy they use during a period of time. It's not peaked priced.
We don't have peak pricing now.
Not right now, but if we have time of use rates, that's going to be peak pricing.
We don't have time of use rates either.
No, time of use rates will be proposed in the next Evergy rate case.
Okay.
They've assured us it's coming.
Okay, so we do need to pay attention to that.
We do.
Absolutely.
And we do need to get out and help. We've sat down with Evergy to talk about working together on some type of an education program and with positive results. They understand that we can add value in this workspace, in this space.
I have a property in California, and every utility bill I get, water, gas, electric, they all send every month they send a tip of how to save and how to conserve. And do we do that here in Kansas? I don't think I see.
I don't know that
that
we
much
do.
of that.
There's some in
Perhaps-
some bill. I'm sorry.
Perhaps if we're going to make a change, that would be a good opportunity for us to use little flyers in our bills to show people.
One of the things that I would love to do, I've been here 6 years, and I've always been chasing my tail most of the time. But one of the things I'd love to be able to do is to be able to use our outreach program to go to communities and talk about those very issues. What can we do to help consumers lower their bills? What can we do? What tips can we provide? What information can we provide to better inform our residential and small commercial ratepayers and any other ratepayer for that matter? Those are things I think CURB can do, and I think it benefits Kansas.
One would hope that if you had an event in a community that people would come. But I'm looking at something simple that they're going to see when they open, like we use for campaign cards, 7 words. but I'm serious about that. I think if we make a change like that, we'll need to do some information. I don't know if it's your job or Evergy's job or whose job that would be.
Working together with our utilities and the KCC, I think, is the right approach. It takes a village. Work together as a village.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dave, appreciate what you do. You guys work hard to keep the rates down, and kind of in conjunction with what previous representative asked, it wasn't very long ago, utility rates were really, really cheap when we had nuclear and coal. Now we have all the renewables, and we have to pay backup generation, transmission, and all that to save energy so people can't afford to run the stuff. Have you guys ever done a survey to see exactly what the cost of the renewable is? Because they don't include a lot of those things in the price of electricity, except the utility companies, the co-ops, and the regular city-owned municipalities. They have to make up all that backup generation solely for the fact that when the wind and solar don't work, they have to provide generation. What is the actual cost of all that to the consumer that's never brought out in any of these rate case studies?
First and foremost, Representative Seibert, it's great to see you again. I don't know that we've actually done such a study. It's important that we do such a study. It's important that we try to figure out why our costs are as high as they are and try to find ways to bring those costs down. You touch on a point that I do want to talk a little bit about, and that is our work with Kansas's affiliation with SPP, because it does require certain costs to be incurred by our utilities that are never really reimbursed by other utilities in the SPP footprint. And those are issues that we do need to resolve. KCC is involved in the regional aspects and transmissional aspects of that, and that's to some help. But I think working with, and again, is something that we're working with Evergy on, is to become more educated on SPP, so we can get more involved in that aspect of it, and hopefully bring our costs down, whatever those costs may be. But your point with regard to not only transmission, but the cost of keeping wind farms, so we've got that power, adds cost to our bills. So it's a lot.
That's my point is we think all this renewable is cheap, but the rate-based customers are paying for all the backup, the generation, and everything that's not associated at all with their service. If you added all that cost into the cost of delivering the renewables, it would be prohibitive. So maybe that's what, in answer to your questions, why our rates are so high, that might be a way to look at it that we don't see normally. So thank you.
Thank you. The accredited capacity, of wind farms is relatively low, and that's something that we all have to know. I mean, so you've got a wind farm out, but in Winter Storm Uri, although they actually met most of whatever they were expected to do, that expectation was low. It's kind of like what I expect of when I expect my kids to do something. I have low expectations, but they meet them every time.
Well, in address to that, when Uri was there, the winds were performing at 0.1% of their capacity. And so everybody else that had cut back generation had to go buy a generation else. So that's the kind of investigations I think we need to do to see why utility rates are so high. And thank you.
That's absolutely right, Representative. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Regarding the customer charges, the usage charges, and say if we get into time of use, is that the same with like rural electric cooperatives, Evergy? I mean, is every situation or every company, do they make their own charges, or is this a blanket charge for anyone that has an electric bill?
Thank you, Representative, for that question. The answer to the question is no. Each individual utility and REC determines what their rates may be. And in fact, in some RECs do charge a demand charge, which is an additional charge related to the demand that you put on the system. The KCC hasn't done that yet. They did with regard to, they did have a demand charge with regard to solar customers, and that was reversed by the court. And so that's now gone by the wayside. Demand charges are another case. Anytime that you start dealing with peak pricing, it gets complicated for the consumer in a case where you need to go. To answer your question directly, rate design and how the customers are going to be charged and how they're going to pay is dependent upon whatever the utility is.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And any time that we could come by, we'd love to be able to sit down with our legislatures and find out what your priorities are with regard to utilities and energy, and try to meet those expectations. So thank you for all that you do, and thank you for indulgence of this old man getting up here and waxing and waiting for a while.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, Luke Drury, fiscal analyst with Legislative Research. And now I will present the Board of Veterinary Examiners budget. Please note, and before I get started, I will try to slow my roll a little bit, and I apologize for being a little bit quick on the first one. This is the first biennial agency in this committee. So that is to say that this has a 2023, a 2024, and a 2025 budget. There's a number of them listed in statute. I think there's 22 that have those requirements on it. Again, the first page is a overview of actual expenditures, along with a short snippet for your reviews for an executive summary as well on page 1 and page 2. What I would like to do is I will start here on page 3. The veterinary examiners is a entirely fee-funded agency, and revenues are generated from licensing, registering, and examinations to veterinarians and veterinarians technicians who practice veterinary medicine in Kansas. And that is something you will see standard across several different agencies, that those practitioners pay those licensee fees into those boards and commissions fee funds. Moving on onto page 4, you will see a list of licensure fees, which includes what the current fee is, along with any statutory limit that are on those fees. Quick glance down, there are some that are at the limit and others that are not, half roundabouts. Above that is an examination of the fee fund balances, revenues, and expenditures since FY 2020. As you can see, the fund balances for this particular agency have remained very stable, right around the $220,000 mark for a number of years, although there are estimated decreases in 2023, 24, and 25. In a quick glance at those tables, you can see that expenditures are estimated to outpace revenues by a slight margin in those particular years. Moving on onto page 5. There were no changes to the agency's budget that totals $363,270 as approved by the 2022 legislature. The agency, in submitting the budget for a 2023 revised estimate, those match what the legislature approved last session. And the governor concurs with the agency's revised request. If there are no questions, Mr. Chair, I'll move on into page 6.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Luke, why? I missed why we have 23 in here. Is this our normal revisions for 23? Okay, so if there were some needed additional funds, that's where they would be. But it is a biennial budget, only 2 years. Okay.
Mr. Chair, that is correct.
Thank you, Mr.
In this
Chair.
particular instance, if there were enhancement requests, you would see them listed here, but the agency submitted a budget that equals the 2022, indicating that there are no changes. Moving on then on to page 6, shows the change from actual expenditures. And for this particular agency, the increase is $14,817. And that is, again, related to contributions for fringe benefit rates. I got a little tongue-tied there. And again, specifically group health insurance paid by the agency. Again, this is something that I've seen cost indices change from year to year. And those are where the changes are from actual expenditures in 22 to the agency's revised estimate for 23. Moving on then onto page 7 is the FY 2024 analysis. Again, the top page here will show you what the revised estimate was for 2023, and then we work from there to identify what are those changes. The agency's request includes some increases for fringe benefit rates. Again, group health insurance. And those numbers next to those items are also correspond down below. Item number 2 is attorney fees. When looking at the agency's 2024 estimates, estimates for attorneys and lawyers are $1,000 above the FY 2023 estimate. And then finally, item number 3, the balance of the changes, $309, various different expenditure categories, including some contractual services, commodities, etc. Again, kind of a rats and cats sort of change, $309 there. And the governor does concur with the agency's 2024 request.
Any questions? Okay.
Moving on then into 2025, same general template breakdown. We take the agency request for FY 2024, carry that over, and then look at what the changes are in the 2025 request. For this particular year, again, the numbers correspond. The agency is estimating increased expenditures for rents totaling $1,200 in 2025. Increased expenditures for attorneys, $1,200 in 2025. All other changes, again, some of those rats and cats, total $1,900. Governor concurs with the agency's FY 2025 request. And then if there are no questions, Mr. Chair, I mean, at this point, I will stand for questions if there are any.
Any questions? Luke, once again, good job. Thank you. And,
And I did fail to mention, Mr. Chair, I apologize. Mark Olson is here with the board, and he is the executive director and will offer some comments and testimony.
Mark, you're next on deck.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you, the entire committee. I am Mark Olson. I am the Executive Director for the Kansas Board of Veterinary Examiners. Some of you have heard me before, and some of you are new representatives. And you might think, well, what does the Board of Veterinary Examiners really do? Your job is to represent your area when you are elected to be a representative for all the representatives together represent almost 3 million of the population in the state of Kansas, excuse me. Veterinarians are spread across this entire state, and they go to veterinary school and they graduate and then they become licensed. And you can see in the agency mission on the handout that was presented in my testimony, the agency mission is to promote public health, safety, and welfare relative to the practice of veterinary medicine, which is indeed a privilege granted to persons possessing the appropriate personal and professional qualifications specified in the Kansas Veterinary Practice Act. And the Board of Veterinary Examiners was established by the Kansas Legislature, people that were here before you folks, in 1907. And the purpose of the board is to protect the public. The public includes veterinarians. It includes all other trades. It includes all the citizens of the state of Kansas. And so we predominantly, if you think about the veterinary services in your area, if you have a veterinary clinic or if you have a veterinarian that practices out of a vehicle, they need to be licensed, and they're licensed through our agency. And we look at licensure, and there's an application process. And then if they have a premise, if they have a veterinary clinic, or they have a mobile unit, then they need to be premised. And in the regulations of the Practice Act, there's minimum standards that have to be involved in regards to that. And then we also have veterinary technicians that work for veterinarians. And in Kansas, we register. Some states license, some certify. In Kansas, we register veterinary technicians, and they work under the direct or indirect supervision of a veterinarian. So we license veterinarians, we register technicians, and then we also premise facilities or mobile units. And we are a total veterinary fee-funded agency. 10% of our fees go to the state general fund, and 90% is used to conduct our business, which Luke shared in regards to that. What else happens? We have an inspector that goes around and inspects all the premises. We have an administrative specialist that works with me in the office to take care of the licensing. And then, of course, we get calls from the consumer in regards to potential complaints. If there are complaints that are involved, then obviously we have an investigator that goes out and does that. So basically, in a nutshell, that is our organization. On the back side of this document, you can see that we renewed licenses for just under 2,700 veterinarians this last year. And you can read through how many new licenses, the institutional licenses, they're the ones that have a special license to work at the College of Veterinary Medicine in Manhattan. Some have regular veterinary licenses, and some just have institutional licenses that are only good while they work in the school. Then we talk about the veterinary technician renewals. We have the new veterinary technicians, Then it shows the number of veterinary premises that we renewed and how many new premises. And then, of course, it talks about the number of inspections that were done this last year. The governor's appointment office selects the members on the Board of Veterinary Examiners, and we have 6 veterinarians, and we have one non-veterinary member, and those names are listed there across the geography of the state. And then we have a staff. I'm a 0.8 FTE, and the other 3 are full-time FTEs, so we have 3.8 FTEs. And Mr. Chair, I would yield to you for any questions.
Committee, any questions? Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So how are we with veterinarian coverage in the state? Do we have enough veterinarians to meet the demand that we have in the state?
If we talk about the entire country, we're short. If we talk about the state of Kansas, we're short. That's an excellent question. And there's a lot of things that go into that. Initially, we had rural areas that were underserved, and we had a lot of service in the more metropolitan areas. But since we've had the last pandemic, the emergency clinics in the cities are very shorthanded, and they can't even be open some 24 hours because they are understaffed. I know that the Veterinary Association, the National Veterinary Association, the colleges are taking a look at that. And there's a lot of reasons that go into that, but I don't think it's just part of veterinary medicine. I think it's across a lot of the other professions also that we're dealing with the shortage. So thank you, Representative Curtis.
That is indeed like a reoccurring theme. Like there's a shortage of workforce in like every field, basically. So I'm wondering, are you working with our veterinarian schools in the state to try to keep some of the students that graduate perhaps to stay in Kansas to practice?
The Veterinary Association and the College of Veterinary Medicine had a bill go through last year for more funding for keeping people in the state of Kansas. That was passed. And obviously, it's in-state tuition to keep people in state is at a lower cost than out of state. And so there's a balance to fund the operation of the veterinary schools. Obviously, when I went to veterinary school, it didn't cost very much to go. And now it costs an astronomical amount of money to go to school. And so when students have higher debts, they have to, corporate America has offered to pay students through school if they'll come to work for them, and that's hard to compete in rural practice. As just one example, you know, there are people that like to work 24/7, but now today people might want to work 24 or 30 hours and be full-time. So it just takes more manpower to take care of that. So there's a lot of factors that go into that, but that's just part of the question.
And just anecdotally, like I heard in another committee, there's a shortage of doctors too. And in some rural communities, I don't know if you've heard of this, but some will go to the veterinarian for basic, you know, some medical issues that they may encounter. So I have one last question, and that is, how does your agency, do you see any concerns with cybersecurity? Particularly with your agency, I don't know that you connect a lot with outside entities because you're mainly doing like licensing and that type of thing. But it's
a great question. We work with the Office of Information Technology with the state of Kansas, and we do our training and we go through all the cybersecurity, and we try to do the very best we possibly can for that. And we have good support for that, which we appreciate very much. And it's crucially important. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mark. Just to help out with Representative Curtis's question, and you're aware, I'm sure, that we last year approved an increase in the number of vet med students scholarships. And I'm not sure what we did. We went from 5 to 25. Or we added, does somebody know? Because I'd like to just let this group know. Sure, sure. And we added dollars and we added number of scholarships. And it's for in-state students. Is that correct?
Good afternoon, committee. I'm Megan Kilgore. I'm the executive director of the Kansas Veterinary Medical Association. And to respond to your questions, Representative Carlin, the legislature increased the funding so that we could increase the dollar amount to students from 20,000 to 25. In addition, the cap was raised so that we could have additional scholarships received through 4 years of college. So the committee established 7 scholarship recipients for the first year and then layered it up to match the dollars that were given by the legislature.
So we're trying to address that. Do you have any information on any current, I mean, is there outcomes on that? Do you know how many more students we got? Or is that going to take place next year? Or
I would be more than happy to get that information in the committee. I do know that we increased the number of second year students by 2 this year with the intent to continue. They did change the scholarship schedule to offer scholarships in the spring semester instead of the fall so that we could better match individuals who wanted to practice in rural Kansas.
and is there a requirement that they stay in rural Kansas?
There is.
And-
It's a 5-year requirement. Sorry, Representative, 5 year.
And we're trying to address, I think, mostly large animal issues, but I don't know that it's restricted to that. So
The bill that was passed last year opened it just slightly to include large animal practices in metropolitan areas that met the criteria set forth by the advisory committee.
thank you very much for being here, and thank you for that, sharing that with the committee, because it is something that we hear a lot in the building from especially new representatives who are just coming in and they've experienced this and they want us all to know. And so more of us understand that we're doing that. Another thing I just wanted to mention is I saw a special, and yeah, this is just a comment from me, but I saw a special on CNN a couple of different Sunday nights. They showed the same special about how student loans is like the only debt that you cannot take bankruptcy on. You can, I mean, if you gamble, you can go, you can take bankruptcy. If whatever you can, if if your house payments aren't made, you can take. But if it's student debt, you can't. And I think that is having a huge effect on all our professions, medical, especially, and veterinarian, I would assume, but also just for our basic enrollment in college courses. And so, I hope that that stirs the Congress to make a change in that legislation. Not that everybody should borrow all they can and then go take bankruptcy, but when people, their debt compounds and they have it for so many years, they can never get out from under that. Sad. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any more comments on student debt?
Or that.
Any other questions for the committee? I've got a couple of questions for you. So in your office or something, would you happen to have a map of Kansas that shows like a dot where the vets are at now, or some way if we could kind of see where these 2,700 veterinarians are?
I can give you a breakdown. No, we don't have a map. I think that's a great idea.
It's a good idea.
I think it's an excellent idea. Of the 27 to 2,800 that are licensed with Kansas license, we have between 1,700 and 1,750 that reside in the state of Kansas. We have veterinarians that got their license in Kansas and have gone to work in other areas, and they retain their Kansas license. And some of those people come back and retire here. So the breakout, obviously there's more veterinarians in the urban areas than there are in the rural areas. I will do a little research and get back to the committee on how that breakout could be.
My next question for you is, do you have any kind of an update on the avian pandemic? The avian flu.
The avian influenza.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Animal Health Commissioner has been exhausted working on this. I don't have the most current information, but that is a deadly disease, and it has destroyed lots of animals across our country and in other countries, and it's had a negative impact on the availability of food, poultry, as well as eggs and everything. Uh, the Animal Health Commissioner is current on that every day. And when I talked to him before the end of the year, it was still pretty hot at that time. But I don't know where we're at as of February 1st.
The number I got in August from someone from your area was 40 million.
Yeah, no, it's been devastating.
So, the last question I have for you, so if if a dog breeder, do you regulate dog breeders?
Do we regulate dog breeders? We do not.
Okay.
No, the dog breeders are regulated by the AFI program, the Animal Facilities Inspection Service of the Kansas Department of Agriculture. That's a different department.
Committee, any more questions? Mark, you did a great job. So
I'll get some information.
And I think we got somebody here that's going to a veterinarian for some good medical treatment. It's kind of like Kramer on yeah. Anyway,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you for what you folks do.
Committee, any questions for this group? If not, that'll close the hearing on the vets. Do we have a motion to work these budgets today? Okay. So
Would you like a motion?
let's someone make a motion to, if you have any, do you have any suggestions for either budget, or do you want to pass them out as requested? Why don't you make a motion like that?
I'll make a motion. If we discuss anything, then we'll vote, okay?
Okay.
Okay, I move that we approve the Citizens Utility. I move that we approve the Citizens Utility Ratepayer Board budget.
Second from Representative. Any comments or questions? So, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Passed out. Another motion? Oh, Representative?
May I move to accept that next budget?
Yes, you may.
Okay. I move we accept the veterinary examiner's budget.
Any discussion? Those in favor? Opposed? Passed out. Anything else for the good of the order? We're adjourned. Time out. So we've talked here with several people, Luke, of moving our meeting Friday from 1:30 to 9 o'clock. Is there any objection to that?
We're pro forma Friday.
We're pro forma. We'll Zoom it. Committee good? We were talking about moving this meeting from 1:30 Friday to 9 o'clock in the morning. And it'll be WebExed. So with that, we've talked to the Department of Ag, they're good. And that's the only thing I have for the good of the order. We'll see this committee Friday at 9.